And we are here at the grand finale of Advanced Business Communications for Data Storytellers. We had no idea how long we'll run, so I guess as expected, it did develop beyond its initial conceptual boundaries, the whole project, and now we are at the final stretch. We started to talk about visual storytelling, more specifically PowerPoint mastery on the previous episode, and the conversation needs to go on. So we'll venture into different areas, including copywriting and all kinds of other types of asynchronous communications, emails, I guess, as well, and also a final conclusion on the entire advanced business communications journey. So, Dave, sir, I'm very excited about this this couple of hours we have.
Likewise, man, super excited. So just again, to recap what we talked about last time, we said basically, why do you need to get good at PowerPoint? Well, as you move up in organizations, as you become that leader, the amount of time you're going to spend doing PowerPoint goes up. But the amount of time you have to spend really mastering it goes down, because you have not only technical oversight, you've got people management, you've got meetings, you're getting pulled in all different directions. A lot of people would agree that probably the middle layer of management, that director layer, is probably the hardest job in any organization, because you've got that bi-directional pull. So why are we doing this? Well, we talked about some really great persuasive books. Then we did synthesis about how to work in the meetings. Now we're talking about asynchronous communications. The whole goal of this is to demystify PowerPoint and other forms of asynchronous content creation, with PowerPoint being the biggest, because that's the currency in corporate America, right? I like to tell people the slides are like dollar bills just zipping around. So last time we covered the 4 archetypes that you need to make any deck. We talked about how to make lists, how to make animated lists, how to make project plans, how to do an analytical presentation, have a graphic, an infographic with commentary on the side. We talked a little bit about what makes a good infographic. And then we also talked about just idea showcase, those panels where you have an icon and some commentary. And that's just a prompt to help you speak. Okay. And then there was one other like odds and ends thing where it was like statistical highlight reel and comment highlight reel, and ways to use those. If you take the content that we've gone over, you essentially have 6 now basic ingredients. From those 6, you can make any deck you need. I promise. Anything that you want to do beyond those 6 is personal style or your own creativity. But if you can just learn those 6 basic techniques, you've got PowerPoint. So now what I want to do is help cover how to make each of those 6 consistently look good. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about aesthetics to start. Then we're going to get into the written word. We take a little detour, just talk about writing in general, like copywriting and emails and things where the words are more important than the pictures. And then finally close it up with how do you package a deck and how do you present it. And after that, we would have covered asynchronous, and then we would have covered ABCDS. Sound good, Jen?
No, well, it sounds wonderful. And I also like that when we identify those archetypes of the slides that you introduced. Yes, it's fascinating that there are probably all kinds of other species and subspecies out there, but in significance, this must be, strictly speaking, the 20% that covers 80%, exactly. And also which, if mastered, that will give you 80% of the edge that you will gain from this. So it's very much in the spirit of everything that we do.
Perfect. Exactly. So let's talk about the physical layout of your slides. So there's a principle called the golden triangle or the golden F. It's very, very simple. In Western countries, we read left to right, top to bottom. So whenever you put something on a slide, you put the most important stuff higher and more to the left. What's cool is that means that most of the time, anything in the bottom right is going to be ignored. So if you have to put footnotes or things that you'd rather not draw attention to, you can slide those to the bottom right. They're far more less likely, if that makes sense. They're more or less likely to be looked at. But there's tricks you can do. Yes, but there's tricks. you can use things like color and animation to draw someone's eye to the bottom right. And so if you've just got so much content that you're going to fill up a slide, and you're like, oh, but Dave said they're going to ignore the bottom right, use something like an animation or the color red, and you will force them to pay attention to the bottom right. Now you get the whole slide back. But if you're in a jam, top and left is the best place. Next is color. Now, this entire deck is a rule-breaking deck because I have a gray background with those green ribbons. That is, I'm experimenting with some branding concepts with some different colors. So this is one of those examples where like you master the basics and then you start trying things. But for basic corporate templates, they have a white background. And then you have your corporate color scheme. When you're using PowerPoint, you want to use desaturated colors, especially when you're going to have multiple colors touching each other. So in these groups of boxes, right, the left-hand group of 4 is the exact same color as the right-hand group of 4, but I've selected a lower saturation. So in Google and in Microsoft, when you open up that color option, like the paint bucket, you have options, and they have like, here's very, very saturated red, desaturated, and then you have like a super dark saturated one. So same colors, desaturated. When they're desaturated, you still have the contrast. Like there is no mistaking any of these boxes for the other color. You're not going to look at the blue one if they, maybe that's yellow. So you still achieve the differentiation, but it's less harsh. Mm-hmm. And you're going to hear that theme a couple times. Less harsh. Heavy colors, especially when they're right on top of each other, like it's actually unpleasant to look at that right-hand set of boxes. Like, lads, you've seen this for the first time. Look at that right-hand side. I know that it says, oh, it's a podcast. They're working together. They're in cahoots. But like just look at it. Like, it's not pleasant to look at. Like, it actually kind of irritates my eyes a little bit, especially when the green and the gray come together.
No, it's definitely. I mean, I'm not gonna contend that. Definitely not the hill that I would die on. But yeah, absolutely. And I know that this is something that I didn't need to be like converted to it, but it was made apparent when we were doing our own rebranding, and we used to have like a very light color scheme. More like our old website had a lot of white on it. It was like, I guess, like more corporate, unintentionally, but it was just that feel. And then when we kind of did the rebrand, there was one color scheme that I really liked, which had like blue and red, right? And I guess from my perspective, I also built it. I liked it, but there was like a lingering feeling of, it might be a little bit too aggressive, but it never got articulated in my mind. But when my wife looked at it, immediately said that, this is just so heavy. And when she said it, it's like, okay, I kind of get what you mean. And then when we changed that red to like a lime green type, and when she saw it, she said, that's the one. And I had the same feeling. It was just easier to look at, and it cannot be overstated. And this is something that anyone would just look at it and immediately see that, yeah, the right-hand side is just simply more difficult to behold.
Right. Now, here's the thing. So, like, why are you guys talking about this? Because the corporate default is heavy colors. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There are very, very few corporate logos that don't have the visual 2x4 across the face that the saturated color. Like CVS is where I came from, PwC, orange, red, dark pink. It's like very aggressive, in your face colors. CVS,
and Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, all these like it needs to grab your attention.
Yeah. Because exactly, they want to draw. They want, like, there's the field of space, and they're like, please look at me. That's why red is used in so many places. But when you're trying to convey information visually in a PowerPoint, the default palette's going to be super aggressive, but it's way overtuned for the conversation you're trying. It's the equivalent of shouting at somebody in a boardroom.
Yeah, it's
that's
like
what it is.
All caps. Why?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we've beaten that one up pretty good.
Yeah, okay.
And then space. This is the number one mistake I see people make when they start doing PowerPoint. Leave some space in the slides. You don't need to put everything on the page. Okay, the Edward, I stole this from Edward Tufte, but imagine that the pixels are ink and that the ink is expensive. Okay? You wouldn't just willy-nilly start slathering, $600 a drop ink all over a page, you'd be very judicious. You'd be very careful with how you're using it. It's the same here. Have some space, let your ideas breathe, and that also allows you to save it for the voiceover. Because if everything that you could possibly say is on the slide, why are you getting invited to the meeting? And if you're not invited to the meeting, you're not part of the discussion. And if you're not part of the discussion, you're not part of the outcome. So you need to learn to hold back. Less is always more in PowerPoint. All right. Then we get to the second set. Alignment and distribution. Now, this is egregious. Nobody should ever submit slides that look like those green ones there, but you'd be surprised how often people don't take the extra step to align and distribute. So align means there's tools in the PowerPoint ribbon, there's tools in the Google ribbon that you can say align top. So all of those blue boxes, their top edge are shared. They all share the same top edge. And then distribute, make sure that they're equally spaced. Okay, when you're doing something like the panels, you want them to be equally spread out. You don't want to have like two kind of on top of each other and one orphan over there, unless there's a deliberate reason. Again, you break the rules because you're a master, not because you're careless. If you're having a divider line, you can say, hey, put the divider line directly in the middle of these two things. It's dividing. So that's very, very small stuff, but I never heard anybody talk about this until I was in consulting, and consultants are like super anal about PowerPoint, right? So distribute and align, very simple. And then borders, okay? So these are the same, hey, we love those desaturated boxes, right? These are the same boxes. They look so different when they have borders though, don't they? Right? They look so different when they have borders. Dotted lines are gentler on the eyes than solid lines. Simple. So if you do have to use borders, use dotted lines. Simple, simple, simple. And here's another one. This is artificial borders. So those boxes don't have borders, but I've arranged them in a tight formation where they create borders. That creates what's called occipital vibration. Your eyeball is actually like doing micro shakes when you look at something like that. Very uncomfortable. It creates that. That's why the lines are a little bit blurry. It's not because I gave you astigmatism. It's because it's like an optical illusion. So you want to spread things out. In that case, it's because the boxes are so much darker than the background. It creates that prison bar effect. So spread them out. Watch out for that effect. Whenever you're building a slide, watch out for that occipital illusion thing. Edward Tufte says, study maps. Maps very often do not have aggressive lines, aggressive borders, right? Even like the map of the United States, like there are state borders, but they kind of fade behind the point of the map, right? The terrain is more important. They're not generally like, you're not seeing a collection of borders. You're seeing a map that has borders, right? He likes to study the map of the Swiss Alps because it shows a lot of information with very little wasted ink, so to speak.
Wow, we're just going to travel to the Swiss Alps. So that was like a very,
nice.
A random fact. And so I've been kind of looking at the map. Dude, this is fascinating to me because if you think about those optical illusions. So when you see an optical illusion, everyone knows, everyone's been shared around. I'm sure you came across them in school, on the internet. Whenever you see something like that, it's actually stressing on your eye. Like that's why you don't look at something like this for an extended period of time, because the illusion comes from the fact that your eyes are doing all this work, like trying to figure out the image, right? So
I just explained that to my daughter because she was like, "Daddy, why do the wheels look weird on the car?" So we talked about that. Like your brain's freaking out trying to
that's why
process what it sees. Yeah,
it's so funny. So it really ties into that whole thread around limited resources, limited time, limited.
Yes.
It's same thing. So you gotta be thoughtful of that. You gotta be thoughtful of that and not expose your audience unnecessarily. Don't put them under stress unnecessarily. They are under enough stress. You don't want them to kind of escape that whatever you're trying to convey, your story through that. So
that's a crocodile. You're going to turn the crocodile against you.
You don't want to freak out the crocodile with this. So super important. And even if you think about, just another thought, that driving lanes. So when there's a hard line, we perceive that as like a boundary. And then when there's a dotted line, just again, fully subconsciously, that's inviting you almost.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, you can. So just like in terms of how you position things, the function of the border changes whether it's a dotted line or a hard line. So there's something that you can convey even through that.
Yeah.
Just a few thoughts around there.
No, I like that. I like that. Yeah, when you're doing swim lanes or project plans or anything, Gantt chart, like, dotted and solid, like that's a good element of thought. And it's funny that you mentioned cognitive processing, because this probably my favorite Edward Tufte principle, and I'm a huge fan of like pretty much everything he does. But he introduced me to the concept of the small multiple, which is you repeat the form, right? And so what I have here is a well-done example of small multiples. These are bar charts. There are fundamental things that the human eye can process. This is bigger than that. This is a different color than that. This is positionally moved like higher than this, right? Which is just another form of bigger and smaller in a way. But we're usually only good at processing one at a time. So you can create an infographic that contains a lot of layers, right? Like the color of the bar, the position of the bar, the shape, you can have a rotational factor, all these different things. It can be a 3D bar graph. It's horrible concepts, right? But that overloads and overwhelms. And then another thing that people might try to do is, okay, on this page, I'm going to use bar graphs. And then on this page, I'm going to use pie charts. And then on this page, I'm going to use line charts. And on this page, guess what? Back to the line graph, right? So it's like every single time you change, call it like analytic aesthetic, I have to learn which aesthetic you're using. And that's subconscious, but it might take me 2 seconds. Okay, hold on, wait. This is a pie chart, so I got to figure out what you're doing here. Oh, it's a line chart. Okay, we're just doing bars now. We're doing lines. Now this has baggage, right? Bar chart is discrete. Line chart is continuous, so this should be time. Wait, it's still by month. What's going on here? Why was it month bars? Now it's month line. What have you done to me? So all of those things, just like you said, limited cognitive resources. Now you've taken some of my finite resources to force me to learn the graph, and you've potentially alerted me and made me uncomfortable because it's like, why this is like change without purpose. Mm-hmm. Now that's not saying you have to railroad yourself into a single aesthetic for an entire deck. Obviously 50 bar charts in a row is going to put someone to sleep, right? But be very thoughtful with the aesthetic that you're using. Don't change it willy-nilly, and leverage small multiples where you can, because you get to convey the information for free. So like 4 bar charts in a row could be very effective because you get back that 2 seconds every single time you turn the page, because there's no learning the graph. It's just consuming the insight. So I don't know if like how you feel about this, because there is like some people love variety, but I am like a fanatic about small multiples.
So there's so much there because works on multiple levels. Let's just touch on what we already touched on, that if we look at cognitive expenses on processing information, one of the kryptonites and one of the most costly things is switching from one thing to another.
Yes.
Okay. So that's a very, very important truth. If you are in data science, especially in leadership, you do need to switch from one thing to another, one type of work. It's not like you're sitting in front of a code for 7 hours, right?
Yeah.
That you can be absorbed in, and you don't have other responsibilities. Now, the people that you're presenting to are the same. So they are switching from task to task all day, more than they should, but it's just a reality of business. And here you can turn it to your advantage by just keeping them on one track so that you can keep them in the story. And a lot of times when they need to switch too much, the business will just decide that, no, I'm not going to do that. And there are these like silent decisions made when you look at a series of slides and someone is presenting, you make these small decisions about, oh no, I'm actually not even supposed to read that. It's like, so you got to be like very careful about, no, this is important, pay attention, and you make that easier for them to stay with it by through the consistency. And then there's another element of it, which is consistency in general is something that we like.
Yes, that's a good point.
In general, whenever you think about, let's say, relationships or quality of something, right? We like that consistency always. So by tapping into that, even for a short period of time, which is a presentation, will work to your work in your favor.
Nice. No, I agree with that. Yeah, I didn't even think of the consistency thing, even though it makes sense, right? Because the reason we like consistency is because it allows us to hoard our finite cognitive resources. That's like a biological explanation for why you like consistency.
Because it's also your brain says, okay, I noticed the pattern. Now I understand reality more, right? So that's kind of like this positive reinforcement loop as well.
Yeah. And I can let it run in the background while I reserve my direct cognition for the novel.
And I can trust it too. It's important. I can trust it.
Exactly.
It's kind of like the thing when, okay, I can sit back and also just enjoy.
Yep. Exactly. All right. So we're ready to start moving into the written word now. So everything so far has been broad, strokey stuff, visual stuff. So now we've got our 4, maybe 6 archetypes. We've got some tips to make them look beautiful every time. But now let's talk about the words. And this is where we're going to have the detour through copywriting. And I can't wait to get your perspective as a salesman who has to convince directors to give you to join TDS. So
yeah, I have stories to tell for sure.
Oh yeah, man. So we got the headline. The headline on a PowerPoint is the most important part of the slide. The pictures, as I just spent, 45 podcast minutes talking about aesthetics, and all of that subordinate to the headline. Okay, but you have to have a slide to put a headline on top of it. That's why we're doing it in this order. So a great headline conveys the whole point. All right? It's a single point. Careful with overloading slides. And it's 2 lines or fewer. Simple, just like a newspaper. Right? Newspaper article, whether you go on Reddit, right? Study shows that men buy more steak than women. That's a headline. You don't need to read the study. You can if you're curious, but it saved you all that time, right? So you want your slide to do the same thing. Your slide, men buy more steak than women. Okay, that's all I need. I'm going to tune out, or I'm going to leave. I got what I needed, okay? That's good headlines, okay? And you go for, I got ahead of my bullets there, so my mistake, but that's weird. But think like a newspaper writer, not a scientific journal. All right. And it should be a coherent sentence. So what you don't want to do, you never want to do, like chapter 1, section 2, the anatomy of a fly. Like that's the worst possible headline you can do. It should reflect how you speak. Okay? So what to avoid? The sterile headline. Too many words. If it goes over 2 lines, you screwed up. Multiple points on one slide. That's deadly because you're going to end up derailing the conversation. And as much as people, this is my favorite contradiction. So you'll see something like, or you'll hear something like, an advanced person can hold 2 opposing thoughts in their mind at the same time and reconcile them. And then anytime that happens, it's like a nuke went off in the meeting. So either this is an artificial standard that nobody can reach, or it's not real, or we're just surrounded by people who can't. It's something like a partner once said, like adult thinking. An adult mind can handle 2 thoughts at once, and a child's mind cannot. And yet, every time I've ever put 2 thoughts at once, it's pandemonium. So either we're all just children in sport jackets, or you just can't have 2 thoughts at once. So if your slide tries to convey 2 thoughts at once, you're gonna have a bad time. Mm-hmm. And then avoid jargon, complicated words. I know we've talked about the flash roll. You can potentially, use it sometimes. And sometimes, hey, data science people especially, like, it slips out, Like, what's a more simplistic way to talk about precision and recall than to say precision and recall? Really hard, right? And so it can slip, but where you can avoid it, you should avoid it.
Actually, and on that note, and I'm sure we'll get into this with the copywriting.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to mention it here before I forget that there was a great piece that I read. It's a short piece too, obviously. It's a great piece. I said so. It's definitely short, and it's about the parallel between filmmaking and copywriting. They're really good. Actually, just based on that article, I did hire that copywriter for a while just to kind of help us with conceptualizing something. She was also a writer, like she was Jenna Irving. Shout out to Jenna. Look her up on LinkedIn. It's a great article. I'm going to send you, Dave, separately. And think about how good filmmaking, the greatest movies and the most memorable moments that everyone remembers is always a shot. There is the concept of the shot. Which, yes. Let's say 2001 Space Odyssey and the ape like holding the club, right? That's like a shot that's just an iconic moment. Now, all these great shots, a good story is a series of these shots. And each shot is always like one thing. It's never like a distributed scene, right? So there's always something in focus. And your slides, in a sense, they are these shots. So this is another argument for just keeping it super clean and never try to convey more things, because the very building blocks of your story by definition are singular thoughts. So I just wanted to kind of add that layer.
No, I love that. I love like the idea of the camera, because like there's all this context, but then that's a really cool thing.
Maybe we'll do like a separate, like not as part of ABCDS, but at some point, like a whole masterclass in copywriting specifically. And I would love to take that small article and just unpack that onto copywriting. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it might be worth considering taking some of those. I know that TDS, the normal structure is sharing among yourselves, but maybe like, hey, class, here's like an outside thing that could be transformative.
Yeah, 100%.
Talk amongst yourselves. Yeah.
No, these are things that we're like, developing right now. So you are on the cutting edge of that, sir. So
I love it. I love it. One of the OGs that we just keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going. Yeah. Oops, I'm in the wrong window. Come here. All right, there we go. All right, so if you want to get good at headlines, we study copyright. That's why we segue into copywriting, right? Because what's the difference between a beautiful 2-line headline and a 4-line email? Well, okay, dummy, you get twice the lines. Fair enough, but that also is writing. So let's talk about it in writing, right? So what is the most relevant thing to the audience? Lead with that. So you're talking to business people, talk about business things. You're talking to data scientists, talk about data science things. You're talking to kids, talk about what kids like. There's this principle in copywriting where you think of the canonical form. That's not what he calls it. It's like almost like an archetype, or like like your target person. And you really try to empathize with that target person. It gets into things like user-centric design and everything like that. So like I'm writing for Jake. Jake's a dad of 3. Jake's constantly struggling for time, but he's trying to make time for his hobbies. I have a solution that will allow him to get back 1 hour per day so that he can then still focus on his hobbies. So what does he want to do his hobbies? I need to lead with more time for your hobbies. Then I can build empathy. Then I can do other stuff. And then when there's a number, you always want that number. Right, numbers are fantastic, and so it looks like this, right? So, due to improved conditions and unit costs, we increase sales. Right, versus we sold 32% more product due to improved conditions and unit costs. There is not, aside from the fact that I added a number, I did not create new information. I just rearranged it. So this is how I approach headline writing, and we're going to go deeper, even deeper down the rabbit hole on copywriting. But as we start to go down this path, Laz, what do you think of these 3 principles as our first principles to build on top of?
Love it. Because so there are all these uncanonized best practices that I've also been using. So when you point them out, I can reflect on how I apply the same things that never have been spoken before. And for example, like, in the second option, you said that we sold 32% more product due to. So there are a few things going on there. First of all, as you open the sentence with "we sold," immediately I can enter the story. Someone's doing something. There's an activity going on, right? In the first one, due to improved conditions, abstraction immediately.
Yes.
And I'm resisting that abstraction. I'm not. Like open the door. Don't want to really go in, right? But in the second one, no. Okay, we sold 30% more product. I can conceptualize that. Okay, that happened, and then due to. So the second line in this second option is improve conditions and unit cost. So there's a singular thought conveyed in one line, while in the other one is costs we increase product sales. It doesn't make sense in on its own. So there are these like micro things that are going on too when I decide whether to put one word into the next line or not. There are a few considerations there, the visual outline of it, right? But then sometimes you just gotta maybe sacrifice the longer first line because you will have a more coherent thought in the second line. So again, there's this like short little like storytelling bursts that are happening when you look at copywriting and how the audience processes it.
Man, I got lucky because that's just because improved doesn't fit. So Microsoft forced it.
Sometimes it will work in your favor. Yeah.
All right. So back into this, so we're talking with line break. That was sort of divine providence. And now as the guy who wrote the email who got me to say yes to TDS and ultimately now led to, through many different things, the butterfly effect, we're now doing ABCDS. Let's talk about writing specifically. So here's how I approach writing in general. I'm curious about what you think. So first, I already said this, but I'm going to say it again because I can't say it enough. If there's a number, move it earlier in the sentence. So now in this case, again, after blah, 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 sales increased by 15% versus sales increased by 15% after blah, blah, blah happened. This is just like whenever I am in the mode where I'm trying to edit and I want to have the most impactful prose possible, this is the first thing I check for. Where are your numbers and can you pull them up higher into the sentence? And this is my version of the benefits, not features principle of sales writing, right? Don't talk about the features. Oh, this pen has infinite ink and it does. No, it's like, hey, you know, I shouldn't have done the pen thing. I'm actually terrible at the pen example, but point is benefits, not features, right? So that's my first principle. For you, how do you approach like this concept when you're trying to bring people into TDS?
So think about it this way. And by the way, a lot of the stuff that we're doing, even with the communication. So this is great. And now even the whole idea of the copywriting course, because a lot of it is just implicit kind of experience knowledge. It's not like a structured thing that went into it, right? But now I see the patterns emerging around that. And one thing is that when you start a sentence, you should always start with what people actually care about. So I'm going to also repeat that. So start with the part what people actually care about. If you look at those two examples, the first one, after improving prices and product placement, sales increased by 15%, as opposed to sales increased by 15% after prices and product placement were improved. Well, one of the differences is that no one really cares about improving prices and product placement. That's not like a real impact, a real outcome. But sales increasing by 15%, now that raises eyebrows. Now people are invested in this. It also buys you that intrigue that, okay, how did they increase by 15%? Oh, well, prices and product placement were improved. Great. It works as kind of like a mini story. Otherwise, it just, again, you expended, you spent your credit, your attention credit in the beginning of the sentence, and it didn't deliver. So even from a cognitive experiential perspective, there's no good like payoff to that little experience, as opposed to, you see? So with that, and we're still talking about headlines. So headlines are obviously the most precious real estate that you can have. And the shorter, the better. And it's the most difficult thing to do. It's the most difficult thing to do always, because you have so much to say. You're confident about your offering, your like unique perspective and all that. Otherwise, why are you sending the email? But the fact that you have this, you will have to like sacrifice so much with those titles. So there's a whole like area that we can explore with different types of titles. some of it is based on industry best practice. Like, let's say there's the intrigue title, right? So when you're just leaning into intrigue, something that's just thought-provoking, something that people cannot even figure out for the first time. Or it can be brick and mortar, no benefit outcome, which ties directly into people's motivations and desires and actually what they experience. It's not abstract, so there's not like many layers of separation between their, I will use that phrase, lived experience and what you're actually presenting, because that's a huge pitfall that especially when you're building something and you're so familiar with it, you can think of it and you think about it all the time in abstractions as well. Right? Those are like higher levels of cognitive processing. Obviously, it's yours, so it's easy for you. But whoever you're talking to, it's difficult. They need to get out of whatever they are in right now and step into your perception of the universe. So in that way, the more steps you can take towards them, the better. So those are just a few thoughts around that first point.
Yeah, like, the way that you're framing it, it reminds me of something I read. I want to attribute this to Scott Adams, but it was like the job of the first sentence is to make you read the second sentence.
Yeah, always.
You know what I mean?
Always.
And so like, and then the job of the second sentence is to make you read the third, and so on and so on. I'm pretty sure it was either Scott Adams or Jim Edwards, one of those two guys.
And absolutely. And look, this is sorry. You went to continue.
No, it was the same. I was going to rehash it. Like, you want to bring them in because you're the expert, but they're distracted and busy, and this is foreign to them. So how do you go to them to kind of lean forward so that you can yank them down the journey, so to speak? Absolutely,
and it's true for any kind of business relationship. If you think about it, that. Even in a sales conversation, I mean, a sales conversation can be 15 minutes, it can be an hour, it can be multiple, it can take a year, with multiple people and multiple stakeholders. I mean, we talked about it even during that conversation that we had around kind of the finding the right projects and delivering on the right projects, finding the right stakeholders, getting that buy-in from multiple stakeholders. Same idea. And at each stage, that's what you're doing. You buy credit, relationship credit, and interest credit, and intrigue credit, so that you can continue that relationship, right? And it ties into how, in a good relationship like that, you're always focused on, hey, these touch points, how valuable are they? How value-packed are they? Right? Yep. How much value they deliver just on their own. And you can actually check always that, hey, this conversation is not delivering that much value. So either you need to, reinvestigate, but in general, that's the rule. And it's the same with sales, and it's the same with any messaging. Like, does this deliver value? Does this deliver something that's new, that's insightful? So actually, good copywriting, it's all about that. Is how to generate as much value as possible and keep the conversation evolving.
I love it. And so that sets up for principle number 2. And this was the hardest for me to accept. Adjectives are more likely to create noise than to help, unless you can keep them to be completely unambiguous and relatively uncommon. All right. And so this is like a perfect example. We had a big decline in sales versus sales declined 20%. Okay. Big decline is, and there's an adjective, big, but what does that actually mean? Right? Because you might hear big decline in sales and think, I guess we're only down 5%. I guess that sucks, but like, we can recover. Then you find out, no, actually it's 20%. And now I've like completely blown through your expectations that you anchored to. And at no point did I try to anchor you to 5%. You anchored yourself. So now I've like betrayed you, even though we've never talked about it. Or I say big and you're like, great, they're down 50%. The world's over. I'm going to get fired. You're going to get fired. My wife somehow doesn't even work here, is going to get fired. Like, you start catastrophizing because you filled in the boogeyman while it's 20%. Now you might be relieved. Oh, it's only 20%. But at the same time, I've lost you because your crocodile's planning for Armageddon. So the adjectives are like probably the most fun part of the English language, right? Because that's where poetry comes from and all this other stuff. But this is not the time to be poetic. So, yeah, just be unambiguous. Like certain adjectives are unambiguous. Like if I say something is faster than something else, like, yes, you might think, oh, you're going to take it from 5 minutes to 30 seconds when it might be 5 minutes to 4 minutes. So it's still somewhat, there's some ambiguity there, but it's harmless ambiguity. And so I guess you want to be leery of where the ambiguity can be harmful, where they fill in the boogeyman or the jubilation. One of the things that is a recurring meme, I don't know if growing up you had the same experience, but you know those tins of cookies? So it's like a metal tin, and they have like butter cookies inside of it. Yeah. But grandmothers love to reuse that container for like sewing supplies.
So I think it's a universal.
Okay, all right.
And things happens across cultures.
Across cultures, okay.
and eras and.
Okay, it transcends.
Absolutely,
culture.
Yeah.
Okay. So like you see that in your brain's like, hell yeah, cookies. You open it, needles and thread, and you're just like so sad. But at no point did your grandmother tell you that was a box of cookies, right? So that's where like the ambiguous adjective can get you in trouble. I don't know, like I don't know if you have any thoughts on this one particularly, but like as I was thinking of best practices, I was like, I have to put this one in here because I myself am constantly having to strip out my adjectives when I'm editing.
So this is fascinating. You know, well, we also have different variations of that in Hungary, which one of them is the ice cream bucket that actually has goulash in it in the freezer. Right?
Nice.
So
that is not ice cream. Yeah.
And also probably it's not like cross-cultural. It's probably like very specific to that region in the Carpathians of Central Hungary, but Central Europe. But I digress. So yes, the same idea of not being, it's like a disappointment. You know, want to in general avoid it. So yes, 100%. Also, again, real estate. So when you want to convey it, it's just better to convey it. But, and I think you already alluded to it in a way, that there might be an exception to this, but I think it needs to be used not that frequently, and I'll explain why. And that's the Vossian tactic of it's going to be like the worst thing you've heard this week. You know,
labeling.
I'm going to ruin your day right now.
Yes.
Sales are down 20%. Whew, okay, right? So, but you see, you did deliver the actual figure. So it's not like the big decline was a standalone, but it was followed up with the specifics. And imagine if you did this like 10 times in a presentation, it would be comical and unacceptable. So you're not going to use it all the time. It's like a very specific.
You can't ruin someone's day 10 times in 1 hour.
You can't take them on that kind of roller coaster. It will be exhausting. It will be exhausting emotionally. You don't mind, but okay, especially in a very specific situation, it's something that you can use in general. Steer away from it. That's the only, I guess, not even caveat, but
no, it's a good point.
Yeah,
it's a good point that like we're trained in the Vossian arts of labeling, and labeling does have an innate sort of adjective, and so. But you're right. Only ruin someone's day once a day.
Yeah.
That's
another T-shirt. I think we have a full merch store.
Full wardrobe. Nice. Brevity and conciseness are way more useful and way more effective than long form. Just like we were lamenting that people can't hold two thoughts in their head at the same time. People can't really hold the same thought in their head for a long time. And so if you have to do it, especially in emails, this is one of the best tips I ever got from a guy named Nate that I used to report to. Put a TLD, too long, didn't read the top. Like, listen, if you don't have time to grapple with what's probably an essay that follows, here's like the 2-bullet summary. But if the bullets are well written, you're going to make them want to read the essay. But that's like we're getting meta at that point. But have an escape button, because nothing sours a relationship than being the guy or the gal who sends the essay email.
Yeah.
You never want someone to see you in their inbox and be like, all right, clear my calendar. I got an email from Dave. Right.
I need to put it on my calendar.
Yeah. So my favorite quote that once you hear it, you'll never forget it. Mark Twain is credited with saying, "Sorry, this letter is so long. I didn't have time to make it shorter." So editing gets you to conciseness. Editing gets you to brief. Editing gets you to the point. I was just today editing slides for a board presentation, and I probably dropped 100 words across 20 slides. Literally, all I'm doing is going through and removing unnecessary words. And here's a super fun one that my mom taught me. So my mom's verbal is like vastly superior to my own. The word that, T-H-A-T. Try it. You can almost always delete it and the sentence still works. It's a weird quirk of the English language. If you do write an email, write a report, write whatever, Control H, find and replace that with a blank, and you're like, I didn't even notice they were missing. So just that alone will save you a whole bunch of words, depending on how much you're writing.
I have a funny story about that. I mean, how funny that is, but it takes me all the way back to high school. And in Hungary, so we studied English, but that's not where I picked up my English, by the way. I picked it up from TV shows and movies and youth conferences, like international youth conferences and all that. But we did study the English language, and I guess there are different philosophies in language learning. We already talked about it in one of the previous episodes with like the visual learning and all that. But this is like classic academic, which means that you learn a bunch of grammar. That's the foundation of the language. And it's interesting that even because the Hungarian language itself is like so complex, even Hungarians study grammar in depth in school, right? Like Hungarian grammar.
American kids, we have to as well. Like there's a lot of rules in English. Yeah. So I think everybody needs to learn grammar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's just that when you study a foreign language, there will be more emphasis on that normally. So we had a student from New Zealand. He was with us for a year, obviously native speaker. And he was doing the same tests that we did in like English tests. So he actually attended our English classes. We're studying English grammar in more depth than native speakers would study English grammar. And he attended every class with us because we also studied, I was in a dual language class. So that means that we studied history, math, geography, physics in English. So he could just kind of study it alongside us, right? That's why it was this specific school. But he also attended the English language classes with us, and he kept getting C's and D's. Oh, right? Because it was just it was just something that he never really spent that much time in. So that particular fact of not using that, right, is something that you just kind of learn, I think, in depth when you build your grammar from the ground up. Right. So that's something that I also noticed before, and something that's just very easy to remove from all communication. Yes.
Now try taking it out of your oral communication. That is so hard.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's okay because we don't have to be quite as sharp verbally because we can use charm.
Exactly. And more real estate as well.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Almost through. So the thing here, it should be self-evident, but everything that we talked about during synthesis, when you're in a meeting, it applies to writing, right? So if I'm in a meeting with you and we're talking, like, hey, Laz, would you be opposed to funding this endeavor? You're like, well, no, I guess I wouldn't be opposed to it. Oh, okay, great. Why wouldn't I use that in a written form, right? And that applies to all the other appeal to expert. Hey, according to McKinsey, blah, blah, blah. Or, hey, I come to you because you're the expert, right? Or triggering hot cognition, like, hey, do you want to make some money? One of my favorite internal pitches to someone, right? Because my career has been to use data science to magnify the effectiveness of sales organizations. So you want to get a bunch of salespeople to pay attention to you. Hey, you want to make some more money? Right? Bang, hot cognition. I do the same thing written that I would in real life. Right? So just don't separate, don't create a fake firewall. There's no reason for that. Right? And we talked about the first sentence to read the second sentence. And then the last part here is it costs nothing to be nice. Right? So every time I write something in email, I will algorithmically, I'm not using AI or anything, I literally just do this. You put a nice greeting, you put a nice closer every email, every time. Okay. Now, I mean, if we're like 4 emails into a back and forth, I'm not going to continue to be like, hello, Les, hope you had a nice weekend. Like that, right? So in that context, no. But like if I'm initiating a contact with you for the first time of that day, I will always be like, hey, hope you're having a great week, or hope you're having a great day. Or if it's closer to the end of the week, hey, hope you got something to look forward to this weekend. Always open with something friendly, and always, especially even if you're like, okay, I'm not going to open with friendly every time, that's dorky, whatever, I disagree, but fine. Always end on an emotional high point, because doesn't matter what you put up front, the final couple sentences is the emotional tone of the email.
Yep.
So you could be like, car's on fire, your wife broke her femur, your kid's flunking school, but like, hey, man, I really value our partnership and I look forward to solving this problem. That's what they're going to feel when they close the email.
I could feel the fuzz as you were saying those words. Yeah.
Exactly. That's a Voss thing.
Yeah.
But like, holy crap, I've used it. And I was like, I can't. That was when I remember reading the book. And I was like, no way. There's no way that you can put a little bit of sugar on the backside of a horrible email and people are still going to be feeling good about it. But I started trying it and I was like, it worked. Because you see it in their response. You're like, blah, 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 everything sucks, blah, 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 like, value the part of the, or you say something personal at the end, like, hey, sorry to give you the bad news. I really hope that you and your son have a good time at the football camp or whatever. Hey, man, we had a great time at the football camp. Now let's deal with the shit that you just laid out in front of me. So it's like, it worked. I was like, wow, like this is actually effective. So this is Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends, Influence People, coming through in the email form. We talked a little bit about his other stuff where it's like, when you take the subordinate position in a fact finding, right, let them talk. The more they talk, the more they're going to like you. But he also just always be gregarious. Force yourself to be gregarious. I know that myself included, as technical people, we tend to be a little bit less on that, a little bit more on like, all right, we're meeting, we have an agenda, bang, 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 let's go. And that has a place. But man, if you just take that extra 5 seconds to put those extra maybe 20 words at the beginning and the end of every email, you will markedly improve your rapport with everybody at the cost of it's like a penny in a wishing fountain.
Absolutely. And actually, this is something that I noticed that I was always doing naturally for some reason, right? I like reading it. I like when people wish me a great week. I just do. And I like saying it. And I like saying it. I think it just gives that free positive momentum to whatever we're working on, right? It's like the opposite of ending on a low note. Even the language conveys like a lower level of energy, less collaboration, less production. And check this out, not to go too deep into the poetic depths of storytelling, but that's why the good stories, the happy ending, is a universal thing, right? So a tragedy is something that's a very particular species of storytelling. Most stories are comedy. So comedy is just simply something with a happy ending. We use comedy as like a Jim Carrey movie, but no, the classic word comedy just means like a happy ending. Like we finish on a higher note that we started on. So that's like an upward spiral. Again, like one of the books I have here, right, is actually The Divine Comedy from Dante. Because that's what it is. I mean, Dante's Inferno is only the first book. This is like 3 books, right? So Inferno, Purgatory, and then you have Paradiso. So it's like we associated the Dante's Inferno with fire and brimstone and all that. But no, like this story, and this is arguably the greatest poem of all time, right? This is people who know what they're talking about. This is kind of like a universally held viewpoint now, and it has deep consequences to your stories that you're telling. Like finishing on a hopeful note, on a positive note, is just great storytelling, and also really fosters future collaboration too. You know, those people who just always show up with the negative energy, is just hard to work with, right? What will happen is that people will just kind of fall away during that whole collaboration. So yeah, both that tactical thing, it works on a tactical level, but also on a way higher strategic level as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's why like Black Mirror is such an effective show. 'Cause I'm pretty sure like every episode has like a crappy ending, and it's just like you feel differently after you watch it. Like it's brilliant sci-fi.
Yeah,
like, as far as like sci-fi goes, they definitely hit angles. You're just like, wow, how'd they come up with that? But then you leave it, and you just like you almost like you want to take a shower after.
Exactly.
Because you need some sort of catharsis to get that out of your system. My wife and I just watched Leave the World Behind with Julia Roberts, I think. Same idea. You're watching the whole movie, waiting for like the happy ending.
Yeah, you're clinging to
or
it,
like the grand resolution. You never get it. It's just kind of like everything just deteriorates.
Yeah.
And then it gets to, and then they're like, okay, well, we only had 90 minutes of runtime, so bye everyone. And it's just kind of like.
And another movie that I recommend you check out, it's called Life. So it's Jake Gyllenhaal, Ryan Reynolds. It's from the director Aronofsky, famous director. And it's that movie that's just like my whole next day was ruined, but it was still a brilliant movie, right? So it's one of those. It's not because it's, I don't know, it's not gory. I mean, it has probably some, it's like a sci-fi horror type of thing, but it's more like the psychological consequence of, I don't want to spoil the story, but it doesn't finish on a high note. Let's just leave it at that. And
right.
But it's also well put together. It's like the artistic value in it, and the cinematography is top notch. Like everything else, it's there. You see, but that's the exception. If you think about the greatest stories, think Lord of the Rings. I mean, the book. That's also arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, pieces of literature of all time. That's actually positioned for public consumption. That's a big statement. That's like probably
it's a fair one. I mean, if you think about how much high fantasy is predicated on that.
Oh yeah, it's a foundational fabric.
Like it's a pre-post. There's a pre-post with that one.
Exactly. The OG, the definition of OG literature.
Yes.
And in that, the third book, it's literally like 100 pages of celebration. Right, so it's like that's it, and you can, there is a reason why that is such a huge story that people are to this day like obsessive about and passionate about, and it just keeps bearing fruit if you think about it. And like even modern interpretations, the movie, even the series. I didn't watch the series, full disclosure, but the movies might be something that will never happen again because it's like that big. Anyways.
Peter Jackson's trying.
Yeah.
3 more movies. They said another trilogy. I can't wait.
Well, yeah. I mean, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, man. I remember, like as a kid, I watched Willow. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Willow with Warwick Davis and Val Kilmer, but like that set me on the path for my whole life of just loving high fantasy. And then I got to see the Lord of the Rings movies in college, and I think that just
college, it's a great time.
Blew my mind. I was like, that movies could do that. And I was like,
it was my high school series. So when I was in high school, so that was probably between age of 15 to probably like mid-teens or so, and literally we watched it like 10 times.
Nice.
Like, each movie, right? And then who knows how many times the full version, the extended one, and all that. So
nice. And then the last thing with good writing, whether it's an email, headline, whatever, is that when you have a call to action, you have to make it so clear, so obvious. Adjectives, that they border on patronizing, right? It can never be more obvious. It can never be simple enough. But here's the trick, because people would know that you're patronizing it. They're going to get resentful if you're patronizing them. So that's why you have to be persuasive. So all of this stuff that we've been talking about builds on that other stuff. It's like, you learned from 4 different luminaries, and we did some synthesis and all this great. You have a whole broad array of how to convey things to people in a way that's going to bring them to your side. That's your call to action. But the call to action has to be completely unambiguous. It has to be so obvious. It has to be so like borderline patron. Like, I need you to click the button, right? But you don't say it like that. It's all ensconced in this beautiful persuasion that they're just like, I can't wait to click that button, dude. Just put it on. Where's that button? I can't wait to click it. And like that's how this all comes together to get the behavior change. But it has to be so clear. So
I'm wondering that data science app that you built that was called Disneyland for Salespeople.
Yeah.
And the that great story. So I don't know exactly how that app looked like, but I imagine buttons like increase sales.
I wish I could. If I was still there, I would have built an easy button.
Yeah.
Where it would algorithmically choose, like, here's your best 50. Like, how many leads do you want? Fine, we'll figure out the best 50.
Yeah.
Or we'll figure out the best 10.
And then the call to actions, right? It's not like click here or no. It's like, what is it that it will do? Like,
right.
Like, just make it very, very evocative. And again, storytelling. Tell a story with that button as much as you can. Again, right. if a headline is high value real estate, well, guess what? A button is premium.
It's right there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But we don't have buttons usually. We have like, I need you to use this model. I need you to change this behavior. I need you to prioritize this.
Yeah.
Oh, this sales opportunity versus that sales opportunity. I need you to fund my initiative instead of that initiative. Those are the calls to action, but it can't be left hanging in the air.
Yeah.
It can't be like, and here's 38 reasons why data science is wonderful. And then I stop and then I assume, okay, I made my case. When the time comes, they're going to fund me. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to pull it all the way through. This guy used to work with Steve. You got to pull it all the way through. Right? What I like to tell my team, you got to get the money in the bank. You can't just put out the analysis. You've got to get the money in the bank. So that's what I mean by that. It has to be obvious and border on patronizing. Like, would it be ridiculous to make an investment in this team? Are you ready to go make an investment in this team? Or what's missing to help you make an investment in this team? But you clearly say, like, I need you to invest in this team. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not hanging up the phone. I'm not walking out of this room until we've addressed that topic. Now, they might still be at no, which means you've got to do objections handling and stuff. But you can't just walk away and hope that, 2 weeks later when they're doing the 2026 budget that they've got, your best interests in mind still. Mm. Because by then they've had 300 meetings and had, 700 requests for money.
I love this so much because even when we spoke about this in the context of that project before the recording, right. Of got to finish the project, you got to finish the projects, you got to put it through. So there is that proactive element in it, and you need to drive it all the way until the job's finished. The job's not finished. So it ties into this iconic short. I think you can search for it on YouTube, maybe less than a minute. It's a press conference with Kobe. So this will probably hit home for you because it was
our obligatory Kobe reference. We need
absolutely. I have a list of 15 that I prepared for today, just looking for an opportunity to drop at least one. Yeah. The situation presented itself. Okay. And it will hit home for you because it was during that finals against the Celtics that the Lakers ended up winning. I think it was the 5th championship that Kobe got, the last one, the big one, Game 7 against the Celtics. I think so. And so press conference, they are up 2-0. So that means that they won 2 games of the finals. It's the best of 4, correct? So it's
first of 4, best of 7.
Yeah. Sorry. Best of 7.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. First to win 4, best of 7. Right. So they're up 2-0. So that's great. And the good news. And Kobe's in the press conference just ice cold. Right? Very annoyed, just answering in very short sentences. And the reporter asks him, why are you not happy? And then Kobe says, what is there to be happy about? And the reporter says, well, you're up 2-0. And Kobe asks, well, is the job finished? Job's not finished. It's like job's not finished. Well, is the job finished? I don't think so, right? And that's very important, and it's easy it's the easy option to no, I did what I could. I planted all the seeds, so just hope for the best, right? That often presents itself as, I don't know, maybe even the more virtuous option, but I think that's an illusion, right? It's just the unwillingness to enter into potentially some new challenges. But if you care about it, if you actually want to see it through, often you just have to do it. And that applies strategically on a project, and that applies definitely even in shorter bursts of communication to make sure that you keep what we call the tension in the string, right? It has to be there until we earn our way to celebrate.
I'm thinking about this. This is like a spontaneous thought, but we have so much content in the world that gets you motivated to start, get that first mile, right? There's no shortage of that. I think people over-index on that. They think, I'll use a good idea, and then the money comes afterwards. There's been a recent trend about the middle long part, which is like people will say, oh, discipline's more important than motivation. I think that's like the David Goggins, Jocko Willing, like those guys becoming more prevalent have like really helped to propagate that. Like you get inspired and motivated, and then that peters out. And so you end up with a ton of projects at 20% completion. And then like that middle 60 where you go from 20 to 80, that's super arduous. But I don't think there's enough at all on the last mile. Mm-hmm. Like the way you're just talking, like Kobe, you're up 2-0. Like you guys are killing it. You know, maybe they're about to do a home stretch, which means they have an advantage. And right, I don't know anything about that series, but I guess like what you just said, it's like, why are you celebrating? We're not done yet. Like you're at the 20-yard line. You haven't scored a touchdown yet. Like that. I don't know how much content there really is on finishing things off. And like that's so difficult. And, you know, I'm looking at myself and my projects. This is like open reflection now. That's probably my worst part is like that. Cause you kind of say, okay, I just spent all this time in the lab and then I'm going to like pass the baton to the final leg of the relay and they're going to take it. But then they're like, I'm doing other things, bro. I think you should just keep carrying the baton. And you're like, I paced myself to hand it off. I didn't pace myself to keep it. I think that's an interesting thing. It might be worth scratching at that in like a future discussion or just
absolutely
like thinking about that. But I don't think we have enough content to help people with the last mile.
But also that's most brutally difficult. The stakes are the highest there.
Right.
Your commitment, your investment already in it is the highest. It's a tough, challenging place to be. And think about that specific scenario. It's not even that, Kobe's only halfway through and he's still not happy. No, he had a regular season of probably like 80 games.
Right, fatigue is definitely a factor at that point.
And they literally played for months and months and months and months, back-to-back games, invested all that. One that like made the regular season, just beat themselves through the playoffs. This is the finals, right? So it's like the 23rd hour. 55 seconds or so, but it's just far from finished. Yeah. It's a tough thing for sure, and that's why doing something for 80%, that's not an achievement. You know, that's something that you did, not something that you achieved. So there's also, and sports often, by the way, like I know that sports are not often viewed as like the greatest metaphors for life, but there's something to be said about also the obsession around sports come from the fact that kind of story of the achievement, the trophy, there's like a religious zeal around it for a reason.
That's war. Sports are war.
Yeah, exactly. So
we used to, like, war heroes are universally lauded. Mm-hmm. War heroes, I'm talking about war criminals right now. So war heroes, like the Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Napoleon, George Washington, like the people that go to battle, George Patton, like the people that go risk and win. Like that's heroic. The soldiers themselves, heroic. We've been in a very long stretch of general peace. Sports is essentially highly controlled warfare. And so that athletic prowess is the martial prowess. And there are metaphors there. And you do have to play all the way to the final whistle. You can't just, like the famous example where the Patriots came back, it was like 28-6 or something in the Super Bowl against the Falcons. I think it was the Falcons. And that's an like, we were winning for 3 quarters. He's like, yeah, but not the last quarter, which is when it mattered, right? So anyway, that might be like the next question I tackle. Is that
that would be beautiful.
I might go dig into it. Yeah,
that would be beautiful segue, right?
Yeah. I'm just like, as we're talking, like we got so much to get you started. There's a growing body to keep you going through the rough middle, but then how do you finish when you've got all that fatigue, when you've got all that other stuff?
That's my definitely a thread to pull on. Yeah.
I'm gonna pull on. I think I might pull on that next. All right, back on track.
Yeah.
And I owe you a BJJ reference because you got a Kobe. You're up 1-0.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Yeah, I'm gonna find it. All right. So we've talked about that was our detour through copywriting. We're gonna go back to deck building, and now we're gonna talk about how to assemble the deck. And I'm gonna go a little bit fast here because this is very mechanical. And the concepts are not that difficult, okay? So you have your headlines. Headlines are great. 2 lines, make the point, and so on and so on. So you've got the 6 archetypes. Now you've got headlines across the top of them. That's your slide. Is the slide coherent? That's the check. So what is a coherent slide? Headline, single, clear point. You're not trying to do multi-point slides. Every piece of content on the slide is relevant. No wasted ink. And everything supports the main point, nothing extraneous. Don't talk about sales and then have some sort of like contrary, or just not even contrary, there's some like superfluous point about inventory levels. Make a separate slide for inventory levels. Don't introduce inventory levels on your sales slide because they're going to get distracted. Again, they cannot hold two thoughts at the same time. Just assume that they cannot. So that's your coherent slide. One point, everything is relevant. No, nothing that is extra. Okay, coherent slide. Why are we talking about coherent slides? Because then you get to the coherent deck. Most of the time, not every time, but most of the time, if each of your individual slides are coherent, you should be able to bind them into the deck, and it's good. You don't have to do anything else. Okay? Just like when you're talking about copywriting, each individual sentence, each individual thought brings you to the next one, and they're like independent but synergistic units. This is what you're doing with your slides. So they're independently built, independent craftsmanship, but they synergize and they work. You don't have to necessarily go back and start to worry about how A transitions into B and B transitions into C. You don't, right? Generally speaking, not every time, but most of the time. Okay? And so it's just like writing an essay in school, right? Paragraph, 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 paragraph. Your slides are your paragraphs, basically. Okay? Each paragraph is an independent point. And it's coherent, individually coherent. So same thing here, okay? The only difference between all of those papers people have written and PowerPoint is it's heavily visual in nature as opposed to being strictly words, okay? So I would say between 7 and 8 times out of 10, you're done at this point. But sometimes you need to check for inter-slide dynamics just to make sure that you do have a story here and not just a bag. This is something that I got from a guy I used to work for. His name was Peter. There's a difference between me giving you a rabbit that you can pet and cuddle and giving you a bag of rabbit body parts. You're never going to forget that visual. Right?
Thank you. So, I think I needed that embedded in my psyche.
Now you have
for
it.
The rule to take root.
Yeah. I'm going to end on a high note though, so you don't exit with that emotional feeling. Of chopped up rabbits. So then we check for inter-slide dynamics. The best way to do it, take your headlines, take them out of your deck, put them into Microsoft Word, and just read the headlines and see how coherent your story is. You should be very, very close. So even I said, 7 out of 10 times, you're like, oh no, 1 out of 3 decks is going to require editing. This is minor editing on the grand scheme of things. All right, so now the deck is coherent. Okay, great. So how do you physically arrange, share, distribute, and present? So now we're going to start moving closer to the presentation step with the deck. Okay, you're preparing the deck. So the pyramid principle is probably the best way to think about this. Okay? And just like a big, fat, heavy slab at the bottom, a middle, and a tip. So think about that visual in your head. So the tip is for the executives, your senior stakeholders. It's usually 1 to 3 slides. It makes the ultimate key point of the entire deck, and you're summarizing your evidence. You're not going into the evidence at all. Okay? The test of a good executive portion for the pyramid is that if it gets torn off of the rest of the deck, it stands on its own merits. This is the takeaway. This is the tear sheet. This is the one pager. The last thing you build is this thing. Okay? The evidence section is the meaty middle. Okay, this is for your non-executive but still senior-ish stakeholders. This could be 3 to 20 slides. Okay, this is where you're going to use those archetypes that I shared earlier, the panels, the analytic with bullets. Like that's where you're going to get so many of these, right? The evidence is laid out. It tells a complete story. So if the executive summary gives you the gist of it, like Laszlo went to the store and bought oranges, right? The middle is going to be, he got a shopping cart, but one of the wheels wasn't working, but he's able to kind of persevere. He went over the oranges. He had to debate between tangerines and clementines. He went with the tangerines, right? You can put a little bit more space in your story. because these decision makers, this is where you need to influence the most. Because the executive summary, they're going to look at their lieutenants. Hey, is this guy legit? They'll be like, yep, and that's it. Now, in order to get that yup, this is how you get that yup. Okay? So this is where you're going to have like the longer form meeting. You're going to roll up your sleeves. You're going to get into it. But yet there's another level, which is the details section. And this is the appendix. So this could be between 0 and infinity slides. This is where you show your work. So if the middle is talking about, oh, well, Laz had to decide between clementines and tangerines, right? Which actually, that might be the same fruit, but
yeah, there was a recent conversation between me and my wife about this. So
let's just say it was
no good conclusions. So
fine. Mandarins and cara oranges. They're different types of orange. They're definitely different types of oranges. So the first thing was Laz went to talk about oranges. Then Laz was trapped in a debate between mandarins and caracaras, and ultimately chose the mandarins because they're easier to peel. Okay. The details is where you can get into like, okay, here's the study, here's all the evidence of why mandarins are easier to peel than caracaras, as I torture this metaphor. But the reason why you pack your appendix is for your flash roll. Because your appendix are the questions that you anticipate in either the executive section or the evidence section. Because if you're like, hey, wait, you're asserting that Laz picked mandarins because they're easier to peel. Where'd you get that from? Oh, boom, you jump down to like page 68, the peeling qualities of clementines or mandarins, and it's right there in the appendix. You look like an absolute monster, a force of nature when you can do that. That is the PowerPoint flash roll. You're like, I knew you were going to ask me. Boom, it's in the back. Okay, this is the pyramid. So you have your coherent slides. This is where you might put like your dividers. This is where you're planning on the presentation. Okay, I'm meeting with the vice president of finance. I just need these 3 slides. My evidence is almost the appendix to my executive summary. Okay, but before that, I had to go talk to the directors in finance to get consensus. Now you're using the evidence section to try to persuade them, and the appendix is the appendix. And then when it all comes together, you're able to talk, and that's how you end up with like consultants show up with 100-slide decks. It's because they're using this principle to arrange the information to tell the story. Okay. But I think we could jump through, because this is, again, fairly straightforward, but this basically is the details for each, right? And I'm going to skip this in the interest of not boring everyone to death, because I'm monologuing you, because this is so specific to PowerPoint.
I love it, and as I mentioned as we're going through it, I can see how a bunch of these principles are applied in our own decks as well. So I see that, yes. Oh yeah, like the executive summary, that's just, okay, what are we doing? Who are we doing it with? What are we achieving? Exactly. Then there's a whole narrative around how that looks like. And then the very end, there's like usually a big section of FAQ.
Yes.
Frequently asked questions. I mean, this is not our first rodeo. Whatever questions you have, probably have encountered it before. And there's a good answer to that. Very powerful from also generating trust.
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely. And so what I wanted to do, because we want to add value, again, going back to the point we made in the first episode on PowerPoint, we don't want to get bogged down in this because it's a massive time sink. And those directors, they have that bi-directional tension. They have a very, very busy mandate, and they need to be able to get in, do the PowerPoint, and get the hell out. So here's how consultants go from I have an idea to the next morning they show up with a 50-slide deck, and you're like, did 30 people stay up all night? No, one dude with a high discipline process is able to rip right through it. So here's how it works. Write it out. So put your bullets on paper, circulate those bullets. Okay, so if I'm the director, I might send the bullets to my VP. Hey man, this is what I think the story is going to look like. What do you think? Nail that storyline. Here are the key points that we want to hit. Why? Because it's effortless to edit bullets. That's so much faster than a slide. Okay? Then, and this is the secret sauce. This is the one that nobody knows about until you've done a tour of duty in consulting, or you have a leader who's done consulting and wants to help you level up. Ghost decks. Okay? The ghost deck is headline and a sticky note. The sticky note just says, I'm going to do a thing on this slide. because that lets you get a sense of how the deck's going to feel before you spend all the time building the perfect infographic, the perfect bullets. Okay? It's so much easier to edit the bullets or the ghost than it is to edit a final slide. It might take you 30 minutes to make one beautiful slide, only to scrap it because, you know what, I don't like how it fits into the overall. So you can avoid that. It gives you back so much time. Then you build it. Once everybody signs off on the ghost, then you build it. And then you can share it, then you can react to it. Now, this is the most time-consuming part, but the probability that you're going to build a dud slide that gets thrown away is almost as close to zero as you can get it. So in theory, everything you create from here on out should have a final place. Instead of, I just, brain vomited 30 slides. Let's see how many we can salvage. And I got to make 10 more because I missed a bunch of key points. It's like, no, everything hangs off of those key points. And you've more or less laid out, okay, this one's going to have the graphic. This is going to be a panel slide. This will be quotes from the interviewees, and so on and so on. And then finally, finish it. Get the feedback incorporated, and you're ready for the meeting. This is the algorithm to generate large amounts of slides efficiently. It might still hurt. I'm not saying like step 3 is not like free. I didn't zero it out. I mean, there's AI that can help you. But even if you're using AI or you're outsourcing it to like some companies have, you can just say, here's the slide I want, and they'll build it for you. But there's still a time sink here. And so you want to make step 3 as small as possible by investing in step 1 and step 2. And step 2, especially, is something that you just never see outside of consulting. And so as we impart this wisdom on people and they're going to, I got to make his deck, stop dreading the deck, use this process. You don't have to be afraid of the PowerPoint anymore. The PowerPoint is no longer an 8-hour ordeal that ruins your weekend. It's a 2-hour jaunt because you know everything. You did all the editing when it was just words on a page, not a slide that you crafted from scratch.
Absolutely. And just a copywriting insight there.
Yeah.
So I don't know which writer said it. One of those Mark Twain quotes that it might have been Mark Twain, it might have been someone else. But it says that write drunk, edit sober. And that's very important, but especially when you want to get started.
Sounds like Twain.
Something, yeah, sounds like Twain, exactly. And basically, in the first stage, the 2 stages of any writing enterprise, and now specifically, I'm looking at step 1 and step 2. Those are basically like a similar idea of the first one is when every idea is a good idea. You need to just kind of brain dump what's happening and all that, and just literally lay everything out. And the second stage, when you're editing, you're just actually cutting away everything. Most ideas are bad ideas of what's going to stay there, right? Because this is also to edit it meaningfully, which means that you're going for a finished product, is huge effort and time and attention. So actually running it and bouncing that high level thing against like the key stakeholders or whoever's involved is a huge return on investment. So if you think about even our process to conceptualize and produce data stories with our members, it's actually kind of evolved since you and I did it with the sales analytics app, right? Even that was an iterative process, but we kind of have it now where first we just identify a general area or 2 or 3 key areas. And let's say someone's playbook of how to drive organizational change and business value, and then maybe one section is about agile project management. The other might be about telling powerful stories to high-level stakeholders, whatever that is. And the next step is just to fill it out with a few bullet points each. That's it. And then we have an open conversation around that. That's usually like an organic podcast style interview, right? That's actually recorded. And then we build into those blocks that we've already kind of poked at and pressure tested. And maybe with new insights, now we know that the time that we're going to invest in the final stretch, it's not barking up the wrong tree.
Right. Yeah. So you're that whole like write drunk, edit sober, and then you kind of like finish only what survives the editing process. And that's, exactly. I think that's a really nice way to summarize this, where it's like brain dump. Okay, I'm going to cut off a whole bunch of these potential pathways, and now you're only going to invest time on high value pathways, which is the same thing as like ROI on a slide, but now it's a better way to like, you're not going to take a left turn when you don't need to. I think it's a perfect way to like tie this. And you're right. I could definitely see how this would apply to just writing in general, albeit this is the PowerPoint system.
Also, it kind of takes out the mystique from the, hey, it's an iterative process. You know, a lot of times, that's an iterative process. But what does that mean? Well, this is an iterative process, and there's a method to the madness.
Yes. And this is what a ghost looks like. So you can see here, I got the headline. This is the sticky note, right? That's all a sticky note is. So I'm using sticky notes. They're unformatted blocks, and I just put my ideas in there so that when you're reading this slide, you're like, oh, I can see where he's going with this. And you can give me feedback, okay? It looks like a waste because you're like, well, you made a slide for no reason. No, I made a slide to find out if I should make a slide, right? I made a slide that took me all of 30 seconds to create so that I can either get the blessings of all of the decision makers of whether it's worth putting an hour or 30 minutes to make it a perfect slide. Because otherwise you have a lot of really, really beautiful appendix wear, and that is the most demoralizing thing you can experience. This is all it is. So it goes, oh, mysterious consulting, so mystical. Oh, those McKinsey guys, magical. No, they have a system to whip out decks very fast. And they have libraries of templates that gives them even more speed, but I'm assuming everyone's starting from scratch. Obviously, as you make more slides, you can steal from yourself, and then you get to go even faster.
That's why those slides are so expensive.
Right, exactly. Exactly. All right. So this is PowerPoints, very, very simply. So we talked about the physical structure of a slide. We talked about the templates, the archetypes. We talked about coherence. We took a detour through copywriting. We talked about strapping them all together to make a coherent deck, checking for coherence, structuring it for delivery. Here's my executive portion. Here's my middle management portion. Here's my appendix portion. And then we've got the process to go from idea to deck way more smoothly. So no more tears when it's time for the PowerPoint deck. That's the goal there. Anything you want to add on PowerPoint before we move into public speaking and then wrap up the whole series?
I think this was pretty exhaustive, and I love that. I think copywriting was weaved into it because it is the same thing, right? From a different angle. So no, I think this was really good, and I think we exhausted it to a sufficient degree so that we can move on.
Nice. All right. Now, this is one of my favorite topics because I love public speaking. I genuinely love doing it. I know people dread this. Is like one of the number one phobias. I relish it. Like, give me the microphone and let me get on. Like, let me go. All right. And that is something that there's no reason to be afraid of this. And this is one of the things I love cultivating in people that I lead, because you have so many people that like to hide in the back office. And it's like, if you want to really have an impact, you got to get in front. You got to get the microphone. So this is also a way to dovetail the real-time persuasion stuff, the subordinate or the superordinate, with the asynchronous prep materials, with all the persuasion that we're talking about. This really is where it all comes together. So now we're actually going to talk about speaking mechanics, right? So before it was really strategic, right? Before PowerPoint, this was like conversational strategy. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. Tactic. This is the mechanics, like how to actually have a vocal delivery that is effective, right? And I'd love to get your take on this because you lead classes, so you are the guy. You do this all the time. So we both. I'm very curious where we overlap and where we disagree, because I think there's going to be some really nice stuff's going to fall out of this. So,
yeah, absolutely.
This is how I approach public speaking. First, it's okay to be nervous. You use that to energize you. Okay, you learn. It's almost like in this is such a weird reference, but in Avatar: The Last Airbender, when they talk about lightning bending, and it's like, let it pass through you. Don't try to fight it, and then it's harmless, right? The lightning bending redirection. So when you're nervous, that's great. Turn it into charisma. Turn it into excitement. And the more you do it, the less scary it becomes, just like any other phobia. The second is the more prepared you are, the easier it is. So the rule that I was taught was for every 1 minute of speaking, you need 5 minutes of preparation. So for a 30-minute speech, that's a 2.5 hours of prep, right? Whether that's rehearsing, whether that's like, editing your lines and so on. That is why overall, we have collectively spent, I don't know how many hours talking about before the meeting, right? That's why it's so important, because it's a 5-to-1 ratio, right? I love to study professional speakers. Okay, very, very few people are professionals. I am not actually a professional speaker. I speak a lot, but that's not how I make my money. I make my money by doing other stuff. You make your money by doing other stuff. My CEO makes money by doing other stuff. So when we speak publicly, it's okay to make mistakes. But there are some people that get paid to speak publicly. So pay attention to them. Okay? Barack Obama is a fantastic orator. And political people are great examples, because if you could find somebody who's very charismatic, who's a very effective speaker, but is from the opposite side of the spectrum than you are, it's easier to focus on their mechanics.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're not going to get swept up in the message.
Yeah.
Right? So like, if you lean towards the left, find a charismatic Republican. If you lean towards the right, find a charismatic Democrat, and just focus on the mechanics. If you can't separate politics from your studies, stand-up comedians are great.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That's actually probably one of the best, because it's entertaining too. But don't let that distract you from
exactly.
Yeah.
And then one of the ones that I find so effective is religious leaders, like preachers and stuff. Because they are so good at getting an emotional response. So you want to trigger hot cognition, watch those. They are so good at that, right? And they know how to tell a story, because so much of it's storytelling, like especially in Christianity, when they'll talk about like the sermon. The sermon is a storytelling basically. Some are better than others, but the ones that are like really, really famous, the ones that they're on YouTube, for example, because they're so good at this, they're excellent. And if you're not part of that denomination, or if you don't have strong religious, again, it allows you to separate yourself from the message and just take in the mechanics.
This is eerie, because just when you were talking about the preparation, so not that long ago, I came across someone called Fulton Sheen, who, again, I'm not American, so I wasn't aware that in the 60s, his show called Life Worth Living was the #1 show in all of America.
Okay.
And he was, I think, a Catholic archbishop.
Okay.
Right. So he was famous for just getting on stage, and then he was an educator, right? And again, he was so persuasive that most of America was glued to the TV watching this guy talk about philosophy and history and theology, right? Probably wouldn't work today in it's a different world, but still the principle applies. And they asked him like, hey, how come like you're so like fluent on stage? It's like, how much do you prepare for each of these presentations? Because he was not doing notes. So just a powerful delivery, but full of insight. And he said 40 years. So he said that it basically all his life is dedicated to the practice, but then this was tongue in cheek. The actual preparation, imagine that what he did is he wrote out a bunch of notes on each of those talks over multiple pages, both in English, French, and Latin. But then he mastered the material. He just kind of let go and just focus on the delivery. Yeah, absolutely. It's weird because it's old stuff. So if you check it out on YouTube, it's black and white and old. So there's no bells and whistles in the production. So everything relies on the speaker and what he says and how he says it. There's not even color there.
Right.
So if you want a masterclass on this kind of public speaking and how to convey these very difficult, ethereal ideas, that's a good way to go. Again,
that's a wonderful example. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just weird that you mentioned this completely random fact about the religious leaders, because I was just thinking during the preparation a bit.
Yeah. And you know how we were talking about sports and whether they carry over? Like athletes watch tape.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So this is the equivalent of watching tape.
Yeah, precisely.
And then excellent delivery can smooth over rough content. So, but excellent content cannot offset rough delivery. Right? It's kind of like, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, essentially, right? I've learned this over the time. Like if the slide's a little bit crappy or you notice a typo on the slide, if you're smooth over it with your voice, no one's going to be like, oh, that's a semicolon. It should be a colon. Like, so delivery can cover for a slide, but a slide can't cover for delivery. So if you've only got an extra 30 minutes, it's probably not going to be on the slide. You should spend it rehearsing and getting really comfortable with the material. And then finally, your voice is your own unique musical instrument. Now, not everyone has a perfect voice for public speaking, right? But you can control your voice. You can work on your voice. There's vocal coaches. I saw a video on how to warm up your vocal cords before you give a speech. It's really, really funny to watch out of context because he's doing like, undulations and ululations or whatever they're called. But the point is, when you're given a presentation, you have to have dynamism in your voice. If you get monotonic, you're done. The audience checks out. I had a woman that I used to work with. She was my protege at CVS, and that was the thing. And when she broke out of that monotonic delivery, it was like night and day. And I was so proud when she got there because it was so much more engaging. And I wish I could film her and play it back because I said, you nailed it. And she felt, I felt better. I felt different. I was like, yeah, because your voice was creating the music for you. So if not, those are my five bits. What about you? I know you do convene classes, you lead stuff. Anything that you want to add?
This is so good. I didn't expect that we're going to talk about this, by the way. So I'm like, we wouldn't need another episode, but we just simply can't. So I'm gonna take a swing at it. So something, and this is real. Like I'm not saying, often my clients ask me. No, like they literally get the messages randomly, texts, LinkedIn. Hey, Les. I'm invited to speak publicly. If you're a successful professional, sooner or later that opportunity presents itself, and sooner or later, especially, and sooner or later you will be in a position when that's a high ROI opportunity for you, especially if you say the right things the right way. It's just what it is. And they say, how do I? So it's public speech. I'm public speaking. I'm nervous. Like, how should I approach it? Now, obviously, there's so much you can do in preparation, especially, without actually walking through everything. But my key advice is always, first of all, just map out the territories. Again, kind of like when you move in a war situation, you move into an area, huge like benefits will come from your general understanding of the terrain. So map out your speech. Okay, but how do I do that? Okay, easy thing to remember, rule of 3. Okay, is it usually the case that the perfect amount of narrative blocks are only 3? Well, most often than not, but even if not, just go for the 3, because that leaves you with kind of like a confidence of, hey, all I need to do to go on stage and I need to deliver 3 key ideas. So immediately a lot of the anxiety is sucked away because it's not like you're heading into chaos. No, 3 things to convey. And when you have the
structure, I like it. Yeah,
exactly. It sounds like, wait a second, I was expecting something about how articulated word. That will come too, by the way. But first, just big picture, and then if you can, break down each of those 3 into 3. And it kind of stops there because 3 times 3, great. Usually for a speech that you do, a public speaking engagement, I think the sweet spot is one of those mystical numbers. It's like about 18 minutes that you can do effectively.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Directionally, you won't have the space to unpack more than 3 key ideas anyways, and won't have the depth to dive deeper than 3 key concepts within those 3 categories. Again, in general, if you can fit your story into that, immediately it's easier to write out and plan out what you're going to say at each point. And once you finish the first, you know that now you need to go to the second. Once you finish the second, you know that you only have the third left. When you go beyond that, it becomes a little bit more like, where am I? It becomes more difficult to navigate. There's something magical about the number 3 and the human psyche itself. So
we talked about that, right? Because you can identify 3 without counting them. Yeah.
So that's my first advice. Now, immediately, that's great because now I know how to start. So when it comes to like actually how to structure that story, we talked about it before, so I wouldn't go in depth into that. Let's just keep it at the public speaking practices. The voice thing, probably the highest ROI that you can have. And it's not something that people like to hear because it's like, ooh, well, I have to sound like, I don't know, Morgan Freeman or some voice actor, right?
Right.
Well, of course, he is narrating things for a reason because it's hard not to listen to. It's okay. But the good news is that the 80-20 really applies to voice training and voice coaching. There are really 100%. Like 20% of key things that you can do that will like push you to the 80% improvement in how your voice is received by the audience. So let me just run through that real quick, because when I was training sales teams, believe it or not, that was the main thing I taught them.
I believe it.
And we actually had, I remember coming in, we had a consultant who used to be the VP of sales for North America at IBM for like 10 years. And he was a consultant for us for like a year or two, right? And a lot of time, he was also someone who took one of the biggest mobile like phone providers in the UK, like one of the big 3. As the COO, they brought them from like 100 million to like $1 billion value. It's just I knew what he was doing, right? But he was kind of at that point kind of disconnected from frontline sales. And he was like very intrigued by my method when I was training my sales guys in a very, very meticulous way on vocal delivery. It seemed like we're deep in diminishing returns terrain, right? But I was like, no, like trust the process. And really, that was also like a specific product that we had, more transactional, right? So you really needed to make like a powerful performance in like 30 minutes. And there, really, the deficiencies in vocal delivery, usually that was what killed the engagement, killed the deal. But then when the vocal delivery was powerful, it really kept the attention and the tension also, like in the conversation, that managed to push the deals over the line, right? So here are the few things. So one, you already touched on it, the variation, voice variation. Very, very, very common issue that the vocal delivery sounds monotonous. So if we looked at it with like an equalizer, you could see that it's very flat.
Yep.
The flat delivery immediately pushes the audience out because it's unthreatening. It's something that when you listen to it, it's very easy to anticipate.
Yeah.
Okay, so you kind of you kind of tune out. So if you listen to great speakers, Steve Jobs on stage, it's a roller coaster with the delivery. And Dune, are you a fan of the movies Dune or the book?
I have not seen them. Yeah, I'm waiting for the full trilogy to be done before I watch them.
Okay, so
I don't want to be left hanging. I know it's a bit weird, but I want to wait for them to be done.
Okay, if you have seen it, then I would have a great metaphor here with that dance that they do in the desert to not like alert the great worm who is like can detect rhythmical steps, right? But then if they vary it up, then they can kind of.
Well, it's like armies marching over a bridge.
yeah, exactly.
They have to get out of sync, otherwise they'll knock the bridge over with the the force.
So there's something there. So variation, making sure that your delivery is not flat, but you speak sometimes in a tone that's high. You mix it up. So in general, variation that's easy to spot and relatively easy to remedy, and it's relatively quick to turn into a habit. So that's one, variation. Yep. Look into it if you'd like, whoever's listening I'm sure there are tons of YouTube videos on that. Just focus on how to introduce more variation into your tone. You might have never heard about this or considered this. Now's the time. Second, the resonance. Now, this is huge. And I would say that this is my personal favorite. When someone speaks and they speak from this like throat space. And
that's how you call it. I have a different name for that. All right, keep going.
Yeah. So it's something that's very, very hard to listen to and stay with. I don't understand the psychological principles underneath that. But when you introduce more resonance to your voice, if you want to conceptualize it well, what I always told my sales guys, because especially if they're in a sales situation, and we're not talking about someone who's spent 15 years in the industry and they're speaking to a big shot executive and all that, and they have numbers to hit and careers to build and all that. They can be nervous, and that really reflects itself and manifests itself in a scratchy voice, in a thin, shallow, scratchy voice. It communicates that they are unsure of themselves, that they don't have confidence in what they are saying. So they kind of like, they are not really diving into whatever they are saying. They're keeping it high and thin and shallow. Now, when you can move that down into your chest, which I call the chest voice, now it immediately becomes more reassuring. It will sound more confident, and it will kind of just break through the clutter. So that's why, again, think Morgan Freeman. You won't have a voice like Morgan Freeman, and it's not like you need to make it deep. Because first of all, it will ruin your vocal cords. It sounds ridiculous and all that. So don't try to speak in a deeper voice. Just make sure that it's more resonant. So you keep it kind of as low as possible. You can look into that too, how to introduce more resonance to your voice. Breathing is a fantastic way to do that, by the way. Not even before a speech, it's great to do some specific deep breathing if you want to look into it. Box breathing that the Navy SEALs use to kind of calm themselves down before an engagement. It's very easy. 4 minutes in, 4 minutes hold, 4 seconds, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, or depending on your lung capacity, because Navy SEALs probably do it for 10 seconds. Otherwise it doesn't stretch. Right? But look into it. Very easy to do. Just try to speak with your chest voice. That's the second. And the third one is speed. Very important. Yes. Usually people speak too fast.
Yes.
And introducing silence, pacing out what you're saying. There's very few more powerful singular tools than that. Good space and good speed and spacing, especially using silences. You do those three things, your speech on stage will get to the next level, and put some planning behind it structurally. You will have the calmness and the confidence to kill it. Obviously, just listening to my 10-minute rant on it, it's probably not sufficient, but not too much research will give you a few singular tools that you put a few hours of preparation into it, distributed over a few days before your big day. I assure you it will yield benefits. So what do you think?
No, I love all of those. I think the one that I struggle with the most as a speaker is I tend to speak too quickly. That is the consequence of channeling the excitement and my natural. I'm from the northeastern United States. We are just all fast talkers. And so even when I think I'm slow, if I watch tape, I'm like, wow, I was ripping through that content. Sometimes in meetings, I'm like, they're like, I'm like breathing through my ears almost, because I'm able to just keep the pace very, very frenetic. So that's my to-do, my developmental thing is that. But the resonance thing, the way that I coach that, because it's the same point, that's why I got excited when you brought it up, is where you breathe. So it is breath. So if you're breathing in your stomach, meaning your inhale, exhale, your shoulders don't move, right? I'm going to go on camera real quick, right? So I'll do belly breathing. My shoulders aren't moving. If I'm breathing down into my stomach, I'm going to have the warmth. I'm going to have the resonance. If I'm breathing up here, you can hear it, but you'll also see my shoulders move. I sound nervous, right? And when you're in a stressful situation, you pull the respiration up higher. I don't know why we do that from like a sympathetic nervous system point of view, but I know you can hear it. And that's probably why people are like, well, if you're nervous, I'm nervous. Right, my mirror neurons, right, Voss, my mirror neurons are going to turn on, but also it's like, well, why aren't you confident in this delivery? So you can manipulate that by breathing down into your stomach and not into your chest. And I actually got better at this from powerlifting, because you have to brace your core and you breathe all the way down into your stomach and then 360 degrees of tension. So those are the two. So for me, like the speed, the pregnant pause, I need to work on that. That is my Achilles heel. The breathing thing, that's how the resonance comes from where your air is. So if you're breathing in your chest, you're messing up, because you're going to move your shoulders. You can feel your shoulders moving. You might even feel your trapezius muscles get a little bit tense. If your shoulders should be nice and relaxed, loosey-goosey. So that's the That's the basic overview. I've got a couple more tips. I'm not going to do all of them because like these, we've had so many great ones here. So I'm going to find there's a highlight that I wanted to cover, which is, there we go. This page has the best stuff on it.
And just a quick note, by the way, on what you said about like when you sound nervous, then the audience will be nervous as well. Well, that's because when you tell a story and do a presentation, you're steering the ship. You're the leader of that little journey that you're all on.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And then people kind of follow along saying, hey, they don't really articulate this explicitly in their minds, but look, this 18 minutes can be painful or it can be great. It can be fun, right? So when you're like leading that whole interaction, then it matters even more because people kind of will mirror your emotional state, not to put more pressure on you, right? But in terms of demonstrating your confidence and putting your audience at ease, again, the speed and the tone of your voice and the resonance of it will also kind of put the audience at ease, which in turn will put you at ease as well. So that's also important.
You can control your outward emotional. You might be like terrified internally, but if you smile, you sound better, you feel better.
There's a feedback loop also that way.
Yeah, exactly. And then there, your audience is going to be more receptive. So then your concerns about being a presenter go away.
Exactly.
So and you can. It's like the power stance before you present. Like that legit works. Like your body's like, all right, we're awesome today.
Yeah, it's getting into game mode. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a few quick tips I wanted to highlight. So the first is the use of, going back to your point with pauses, questions. Questions are the easiest way to force dynamic tone because we have that upward inflection when we ask questions. It's an easy way to like if they're dozing or if they're daydreaming, snap them back out of that and get their attention. And it teaches you how to implant the pause because you have to make room after you ask a question. You can't be like, and has anybody ever experienced this? Because I know that I was buying oranges. It's like, well, hold on a second. Then the question has no effect. So the tool of the rhetorical question is a way to force dynamic speed, dynamic pitch, pausing, thoughtful pausing, and so on. And then never read your slide out loud. The slide is a tool to help you have a conversation. If you read it, then I don't need you. And again, you want to be invited to the meetings. Okay. Let's see. Let's keep moving through here. I got another good
actually,
one.
with that, just for a second there.
Please.
So it's funny how questions were a critical part of the previous sections that we covered, doing discovery, how to ask the right questions, calibrated questions, strategic level, tactical level. Public speaking. So check this out. There's depth to this because 100%, like asking a good question, asking questions, very powerful tool during a public speech. You kind of like shake things up and generates more engagement as well. Now there's a pitfall, which is connected to speaking in a tone, in a tonality that is questioning, conveys a question while you're actually talking in statements. Now let me unpack this a little bit. So another thing I didn't mention with, the resonance in the voice, the speed, or the structure and all that, is tonality. So tonality is the other big category, huge. And let me break it down real quick into a very simple distribution of 3. So there are 3 types of tonalities. I mean, probably others too, but this is one way to look at it. There's one which we call rapport-seeking tonality. Okay, rapport-seeking tonality usually comes when you're looking for approval from someone, right? So let's say think a customer service agent, or like you get a call from like a needy salesperson from your phone company, right? Usually they're seeking your attention. They are in a very subordinate position to you, and they are looking for your approval, and they speak in a tone that's rapport seeking, which usually goes up in the end. So even when they say a statement, it sounds like a question. Sir, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Well, that's a statement. I hope I'm not disturbing you. It's not a question, right? But they say it as a question, and then every single sentence becomes, kind of like a question when the tonality goes up. Now, this shows that you're not confident in your position, that you're seeking attention, and it actually puts anxiety in people because it doesn't convey that kind of calm, cool confidence. There's rapport neutral tonality, which is just normal speech, And then there's rapport breaking tonality when you bring it down the end of the sentence. It's kind of like dropping it down at the end of the sentence. And usually people err on the side of rapport seeking as opposed to rapport breaking tonality. Rapport breaking tonality also conveys authority, again, confidence, and it generates trust, interestingly enough. It's counterintuitive. Now, you can't overuse it, like sound always like very authoritative, so not to overdo it, but those are the 3 types of tonalities. And then if you speak in a questioning tonality too much, your actual questions won't land that well. Because they kind of disagree.
There's no novelty. There's no standout.
Exactly. So it will introduce some monotonous pattern there. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that because tonality with the voice is also very, very important.
Yes. No, that is a good call out, and it plays off of that first term item there, which is like adjusting your pitch and tone.
Yeah.
I never heard of the down talk referred to as report breaking before. But that down talk, Voss talks about using that to close the door on a topic. Like, we don't negotiate that term.
I understand that also with the report breaking, you it sounds bad. Ooh, I'm going to break rapport. I'm going to destroy rapport. No, actually, like breaking rapport even, it also like kind of can keep us on an objective plane as well. It is just to demonstrate. That's why I mentioned that this kind of distribution is kind of like how you can slice and dice the brain in a different way, in multiple different ways.
Right.
From one perspective, when you're seeking to eliminate neediness and the lack of confidence in your voice, apart from it being shallow, you talking too fast, the fact that you are speaking in a rapport-seeking tonality all the time is also something that contributes to a suboptimal reception of your message, especially when you try to speak from a place of authority.
Right. Well, like excessive approval-seeking will make you seem like you're not worthy of the respect, right?
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
if you're locked into that up talk,
exactly,
then you're just constantly going to sound like this mewling little, thing that's like, oh, please like me. I hope you like me.
And you can be ignored without consequence, which we talked about before. Yeah,
exactly. The last one I really wanted to make sure, because I think a lot of people benefit from this, is how to eliminate You're public speaking, you're in the meeting. There's got to be so few things that just sound worse and are more jarring than the or the or anything that comes across like that. And so I've done research on this, and the best answer that I have found on why we is that our brains and our mouths get out of sync. And you get out of sync because you're going too fast and you have no rhythm. If you have a rhythm, your brain can keep in sync with your mouth and nothing glitches. The is the loading screen of public speaking. Okay, so if you click on a website and it spins, that's the Or if you're playing a Bethesda game and you open a door and it's like, oh, here's a tutorial. Like, come on, man, just open the door. Yeah, that is the loading. The GTA poster, like that is the loading screen. It's because your brain and your mouth are trying to get back on the same page. The key, if you don't like to do the pause, or if you feel like you're just talking so slowly, is to use a rhythm. Right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, pause, take a breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, pause, take a breath. Get into the flow, and then you can speak publicly, and it makes you way more fun to listen to because there's a bit more music. Because you're speaking with like a beat almost, but you will immediately stop umming. Now you might have other stop words that you create, like so is mine, but that's way less jarring than And so the root of the is syncing. So get into a rhythm and you will find that you drop them. That's one that I wanted to make sure we get in there. What about you? You typically, I don't think you ever So how are you able to get the out? Mine was to lean on rhythm. How have you gotten out of your speech pattern?
That's a great question. So first of all, I think it's incredibly difficult to get rid of it if you just, hey, I just got to remember not to say it. I don't think that works.
No, yeah, you're right. Yeah,
and
exactly.
maybe because I'm not really listening to myself. Basically, even when we record a podcast, I rarely listen back. So probably I'm actually umming more than I would like to admit. At the same time, when back in London, I was building the high performance sales teams, a very important part of managing that team was making sure that they always have high performing brains, that they can focus, that they can.
Okay.
So flow engineering itself, which sounds like a very ethereal concept, it's applied in corporate America all over, which is how to engineer structures in a day and in a week that induces the flow state when it's effortless to speak. Learning is like through the roof. Learning ability is through the roof. Cognitive processing. Yeah. Very interesting. You can look into it. Again, it was pioneered by this Hungarian researcher called Mihály Csikszentmihalyi at the University of Chicago, who discovered the flow state. It's a measurable thing, by the way. So it's not like this. Yeah. No, it is very easy actually to measure because it's very concrete. So you can see that when people are in a flow state, how their cognitive processes improves down to the neurological level, might I add. So we can measure brain activity on the level of neurons. There's just
that's where I first heard of it. Was
absolutely.
From a neuroscience point of view.
And there's extensive business application of that. He actually wrote a book.
God, yeah.
Yeah, there's a book that he wrote called Good Business, which should be somewhere here. But I just recommended it to one of our members. And there are many other books. You can look into Jamie Wheel, Stephen Kotler, the Flow Research Collective, the Flow Genome Project, same kind of science.
There's this Irish guy who puts videos on YouTube.
Ryan Doris, I think.
Yes.
There you go.
He's got great videos on.
Great videos. Production value is amazing. That's how I came across him, because our production guy recommended me just watching a few videos just to check out some of the visuals.
So you were studying the greats and you were like watching tape essentially.
And at the same time, I was also absorbing information about how should I distribute my caffeine intake during the day. So yes, you can look into it. So I believe that if you succeed on that front, and again, this is a deep thing. We won't be able to unpack it in 10 minutes. You can look into it. It's definitely something that when you invest some time and energy into it, you can get some quick wins. And the more you're in the flow state, I think the less what we call these brain slips that happen. It won't happen that often, and it becomes a habit. It's just like everything else that you build up. It needs to become a habit. So I think if I'm not dropping too many ums and ahs, that's why probably is because I just seek out that kind of working. But everyone has bad days. When your brain is just so slow for whatever reason. So you won't have perfect games. It's kind of like Kobe shooting 4 out of 22 on the field. It happens, It's just one of those days.
There's our 2 references.
And I think I still haven't heard the BJJ from you, so I'm just trying to.
I'm waiting to bring it back because you said something, and I was like, I want to say something about that. I'm holding on to it and waiting for an opening, which is very meta. All right, so let's take it home, because we've covered an abundance of stuff. And so now I would like to drop the gauntlet for anybody who's come on this journey with us. So we've covered so much. We analyzed, I think it was in total like 5 books. I think Cialdini had 2. Oh, actually, no, McCraney has 3. So it's more like 7 or 8 books. Then we went through how to synthesize it and use that stuff in the world. Then we went and said, okay, here's how you build all the content you need to have these really successful, really persuasive meetings. But so far, even though we're in practice mode, everybody has been in theory mode. And so I'm throwing down the gauntlet. I'm challenging everybody who went through this to put it into work, but to do it in a very, very low stakes way, because why gamble when you're still trying to figure it out? Don't be the white belt who challenges the black belt. I'll take that. I'll take the BJJ reference. Right.
There you go. One.
There you go. There's one. I gotta get one more in there. So here's the challenge. Okay. You are now a triple threat communicator. You understand how to think about persuasion and how to affect your will onto the world through persuasion. You can package all of that into wonderful content, and you now know how to speak in a way that gets the job done. So how do we leverage this in a challenge? Here we go. Put your skills to the test, but do it in a way that's not work-related so that there's no stakes. This is purely mechanical. Build the muscle memory. This is like a drill. So, challenge number 1. Convince somebody that you know to go vegan, meaning 0 animal products, or carnivore, all animal products. No omnivorous option here. No splitting the difference. We're never split the difference. So it's all or nothing. You have to persuade them with whatever argument you think are going to work, put it in a PowerPoint, present it, see what happens. This is the final exam I give everybody that I train. You have to try to make me vegan. And I'll usually do it while holding a cheeseburger. Yeah, good luck. Just to really set the stakes for them.
Just to raise the temperature, yeah.
Yeah, not stakes as in gambling. Stakes as in the food. So that's one option. But maybe you don't care about food, or maybe you're like, this is stupid because no one's ever going to change their mind. Fine. Here's one where it actually might come up. So debating a beach vacation versus a theme park vacation. So this is like Hawaii versus Disneyland or Disney World. Okay? Same idea. You're going to build arguments. You're going to persuade them, but you can't split the difference. Right? If you're in Hawaii, you're not in Florida. Now, I guess Florida has beaches, but the nice beaches and the Disney part of Florida are not that close together. So you probably won't do both at the same time. And if I offended anybody from Orlando, I'm sorry. But I do love Miami. So that's the challenge. This is the most fun and low stakes way to put it all together. But those are just 2 ideas I had. Last, how would you like to challenge somebody to put this stuff into action?
This is wonderful. It also reminds me when I was still in London and I tried to convince my dad to try the ketogenic diet for diabetes, right? Because he's been like type 2 diabetic all his life. And then I came across this thing fully randomly. I mean, I wasn't a diabetic or anything, but it was very compelling. And I looked into it, and I knew a bunch of people who used that to eliminate medication and everything. And it was the most difficult thing. I thought, hey, great, here's the truth. Be convinced. and it just did not work because I did not have those principles in place. Because this is not just about putting together a good deck. Now that you've gone through that whole thing, you understand the psychological levers in there. You will need to think about the person's identity, how to update their model, what their model might be. So you need to be very strategic with it, and your tactical execution needs to be up to the task as well. So I think that these are good examples because they are very like on opposite ends of the spectrum. I think the first one might be more emotionally, sometimes, unfortunately, politically charged, even. But so
we have a backup.
Yeah, absolutely. But the backup is good as well. Even though I think even if you do the first one, it's a great exercise in how to just structure arguments. And if you're emotionally invested in either one of those, then try to do the other one. It will definitely stretch your abilities, and probably can invest even more in the skill development of it. So no, I think these are great examples. And what would you say? So when would you recommend people trying it out first in a corporate environment? So what are the key success metrics that would indicate that you're ready for a real life application?
There's so many low stakes persuasion moments, and you almost want to gamify it. So what I myself have done, and what I have had people that I've managed and led do, is engineer these like micro persuasions. I'll give you an example. So someone on my team wanted to leave early, start their weekend on Friday. And they said, hey, would you be opposed to me leaving at 3 o'clock on Friday? I've got to do something before the weekend starts. And I'm like, aha, you're using the what I taught you. But it's like, it works, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that was incredibly low stakes, but that builds the confidence. And then as you get more confidence, then you play it in higher stakes. Okay, so if you're a director who got there through sheer force of competent data science or leading small teams, but more of a back office role. And now you're in this, Shark Tank where you're swimming with VPs and you're trying to get money off their budget onto your budget, or you're trying to stake an impact claim because now your job is measured by your team's collective impact on the business, not your individual brilliance as a contributor. Those are high stakes, but there's so many opportunities that you probably take for granted every time there's a team meeting, every time there's a town hall, every time there's anything. Even just asking a thought-provoking question builds the confidence to essentially inject your point of view into the world. And then you start trying to find smaller ways to essentially win in the persuasion, if you frame it as a game. And then you build up and you just make more audacious until you find your limits, because you're going to get rebuffed from time to time. But generally speaking, if you're not doing like outside sales where there's no reason for them to care about the relationship after you hang up the phone, you can recover and build it back up and keep trying to find it. So start small, but you might have to, now you're aware of all of the persuasion and negotiation that happens on a daily basis, but then you look for ways to make it a game. Claff talks about this. He looks for ways to inject a little bit of playfulness into these high stakes meetings. Like they want to take the board book out of your hands and you clamp down on it and you say, that's not for you. You'll get that when it's your turn, right? Like playing so that you're experimenting with this stuff. Find your own voice, find your own public speaking style, find your own PowerPoint style. But that's how you kind of spiral it up. Just like, everybody in the data storytelling community had to learn math. Well, you learn arithmetic and then it just goes up from there. You now have essentially like the book with all of the different types of math, but you're going to have to apply it and build up the stakes. That's how, pretty much any skill you do it that way. But I think the key difference is engineering those micro persuasions, because they're everywhere. You'll be astonished now that you know where to look.
And the more you apply it, the more often you will realize that, hey, there's an opportunity. So kind of once you start to look for those opportunities, they will present themselves. Right. And I know that probably we mentioned this multiple times, but it's a good time to mention the 4 stages of learning. When you start with unconscious incompetence, you don't even know what you don't know. It's hidden. Reality does not respond as you expected. Second is conscious incompetence. The facts were revealed. The knowledge has been presented. Obviously, you just still can't
Your mechanics are terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're conceptually aware. And then the third stage would be conscious competence, that you start to develop and you start to put it into action. Hey, there's an opportunity. Let me try this concept. Now, it will be clunky, rough on the edges. You will have your successes and your failures, your hits and your misses. But then when you do that enough, that thing will turn into the final stage, which is unconscious competence, when it became a skill, second nature. It's wired into your very being, and the right knowledge is deployed at the right time in the right way. And here's a third Kobe reference on that. So he was huge on made shots, right? Yeah. I just had to. I tried to resist it, but it's
you are running up the score.
Too perfect, just too perfect. Okay. So he was famous for obviously his insane work ethic, but also that he was the skill master. We talked about this before. You can have a conversation about who's the greatest player of all time, who's the most dominant player of all time, Michael Jordan or some people. But the most skilled basketball player, it's Kobe Bryant. Like, even those who would say, no, he's not the greatest, Michael Jordan is the greatest, Kobe was the most skilled. Now, what he did, he was huge on a very singular thing, which was called made shots. So he had to have his made shots every single day. So let's say go to the gym, you need to make your 100 made shots.
Oh, I see.
400
so he has
made
to
shots.
Complete 100 repetitions every single day.
And not even just a repetition, but the successful one. So imagine that you need to do 100 made shots.
Okay, well, so you might need 400 actual shots to get to 100 made.
Kobe probably only needed like 120, but
fair enough.
Yeah. But point being is that some shooting drills will focus on good form, and to concentrate on making it in a good form, but sometimes just got to get the reps out. And as you get the successes, your brain will associate the successful application with a positive reward. So just exposing yourself to the situations and finding success there will direct your brain to learn this thing. So don't be discouraged if it requires too much energy, or you don't see that much success, or maybe it doesn't land as perfectly as you expect it to, it is progress. So definitely soon enough, it will turn into competence that will give you just more freedom to navigate this landscape for the mutual benefit of all the stakeholders.
So I'm gonna counter the Kobe reference with the BJJ.
Okay.
Reference. I think we could just end the whole series on a mutual reference.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and that would be.
So when you're talking about like the made shots, it reminds me of like the pedagogical versus ecological debate in jiu-jitsu. So there's the pedagogical approach, which is like, here's a technique, you end up with like a basket of techniques and principles. And then ecological, which is like you're actually practicing and you're sparring with someone and you're making all these micro adjustments and you're like discovering moves that work for your body, right? Because my anatomy is different from your anatomy, it's different from his anatomy, it's different from her anatomy. Like, I'm super strong, but I'm super slow, right? So everything I do in jiu-jitsu has to reflect that, right? I'm slow as molasses uphill, right? But I had a friend that was like, he could teleport. He was so fast. And so you have the same basket of skills, the same pedagogical. So, okay, everyone come together. We're going to learn armbar from guard. But then you go out and you practice and you play by yourself, and then the ecological comes up. And like, that's what we're doing here. The pedagogy is done. You've got all the pedagogical stuff you could ever possibly need. But as you go and you play, you have to get your 100 made shots or whatever. That's the ecological. You're going to try it out. It's going to be your own spin or your own little deviation from what we taught you. It works, your brain's going to lock it in, and suddenly you no longer have to do this painstaking edit because you're trying to trigger a persuasion response. You just start speaking like that going forward. Like, you'll find out with that, the simplest one is the no question. You're like consciously like, I need to rephrase this so I get a no, and that's the good answer. And then I promise you, after 30 of those emails, you just default to the question pattern that gets you a no.
And it will be better too. It will be a better version of that no question.
Exactly.
Right? So you will find the right taste, the right angling, the right tone and structure of that no question at any given point, because you won't be able to manual control this whole thing. It's not meant to be used that way. So now that's fantastic. I think it was such a beautiful finish with the BJJ example that I think it was just kind of all-encompassing, meta, at the same time very specific, that it definitely counts as two. So I think we came out
so we're gonna
at 3-3. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, and also I love that we did not shy away from the last mile with actually finishing, because we didn't just put the information out there, but I think we dedicated the proper space and time and intention into making sure that we sell the audience on giving this an actual shot. So just giving you the information, job's not finished. So I hope that we landed the plane properly.
You need to do it. This is the behavior change part.
All right, sir. So now that everyone's model is updated through this probably 20-hour journey or so, I'm sure it wasn't the last conversation between us on the podcast, right? So it's been an ongoing.
We're gonna go do last mile next. That's the next.
and the other mini series on the copywriting and fantastic, sir. Well, look. Appreciate you. We've been receiving excellent feedback already from the community on just the project itself and the idea. And when we're recording this, I think only one has been released so far of this, right? But more on the way. So any finishing thoughts, anything for the audience, or are we good to land the plane?
Let's land the plane, man. This has been a hell of a journey. It's been an absolute pleasure, privilege, and honor as always. I love working with you. So you brought out some of the best ideas I've ever had, and given a space for them to breathe. I loved getting the dynamism that we had, the dueling perspectives, like you as a guy who's sold and trained salespeople, me as someone who does analytics for salespeople. The class versus chill. There's so many different things. I think we complemented really well. This was a lot of fun. And thank you you're doing all the post-prod now, so thank you.
It's now on my shoulders.
Yeah, so thank you.
Well, likewise, and I enjoyed it immensely, and until next time.
Yes, sir.